But 3D printing is very slow and very expensive.
New York has already asked its citizens to do so. Here's the Mayor of New York, Bill de Blasio.
It could be a scarf. It could be something you create yourself at home. It could be a bandana. It does not need to be a professional surgical mask. In fact, we don't want you to use the kinds of masks that our first responders need, that our healthcare workers need. Don't use those.
The Mayor of Los Angeles has made a similar appeal, but a senior White House health official, Dr. Deborah Birx, warned that masks could give people a misleading sense that they were being protected.
We don't want people to feel like, oh, I'm wearing a mask, I'm protected and I'm protecting others. You may be protecting others, but don't get a false sense of security that that mask is protecting you exclusively from getting infected, because there are other ways that you can get infected because of the number of asymptomatic and mild cases that are out there.
I heard more from our North America correspondent, Peter Bowes.
6,000 people have now died in this country, and there is this ongoing debate. The Trump administration is considering issuing advice to people as to whether they should wear a face mask or some sort of face protection, at least covering their mouth and their nose. And the authorities in Los Angeles and New York City have already issued that advice. That said, one of Donald Trump's medical advisors is saying that she is concerned that it will give people a false sense of protection wearing a mask, thinking that perhaps they can't catch the virus, when of course you still can. You could touch something, you could get the virus on your skin and then maybe touch your face, touch your eyes, and essentially get the infection. So there's a certain amount of caution in terms of advising people to take that course of action.
And meanwhile, 2 cruise ships have finally been allowed to dock at Florida after being stuck at sea for weeks with a number of people on board who'd either contracted COVID-19 or even died from it.
4 people died. These 2 ships, as you say, had been out at sea for some considerable time while protracted negotiations with the Florida authorities continued over whether the passengers, some of those passengers infected with the virus, should be allowed to disembark in the state of Florida. The 2 ships, the Zandam and the Rotterdam. And one of the concerns of the governor was quite simply that allowing more people into the state with the virus would take up valuable resources. The hospitals, of course, are already very busy with their Florida residents, even though, in fact, some of those passengers on these ships were, in fact, from Florida, along with a lot of people from elsewhere outside of the state and indeed foreign nationals. Well, they've finally been given to dock, and those people are actually being taken off. It's quite a slow process. Some, of course, taken to hospital, and there have been planes put on standby to take those foreign nationals straight out of the country back to their home countries.
Peter Bowes. To Thailand now, where the country has imposed a nighttime curfew because of coronavirus fears there. The number of confirmed infections has been rising steadily in Thailand. Let's get more now from our Southeast Asia correspondent, Jonathan Head. And Jonathan, tell us more about these new restrictions.
Well, it's a nationwide curfew at night time. That means they want nobody going out of their homes after 10 o'clock at night up until 4 in the morning, unless they have a very clear professional need to do that. It's been a steady increase in measures here. We've seen partial lockdowns varying around the country. Pretty much all public life has been shut down here in the capital, Bangkok. The numbers don't look that dramatic by European standards. We've still only reached just under 2,000 here in Thailand. It's similar in the region. Malaysia is the highest with 3,000, Indonesia only at 2,000. But these numbers are very misleading because none of these countries really has the capacity to test. For example, Thailand is managing at most perhaps 300 to 600 tests a day. They've done up to 20,000 and they're one of the better performers. Indonesia is a particular worry. The real fears there that the coronavirus infection levels are much higher, and the death rate in Indonesia, about 10% of official cases, tells you that the real number may be much higher. The Thais are very aware of this. The big issue also in these countries is that their health systems are really quite rudimentary. Thailand's again better than most, but they know they're going to hit their limits with very small numbers of things like ventilators very quickly once infections rise, and that's why they're starting to scale up these measures. Not total lockdowns, because so many ordinary people in this part of the world depend on sort of informal jobs, and they're very reluctant to shut down all the economies when there's not really any kind of welfare state to back up everybody who's going to lose their jobs.
You talked about Thailand, Indonesia. What about the rest of the Southeast Asia region? Are there varying responses there too?
They've been mostly quite slow, largely because the first infections arrived here right back in January, but for reasons we're still not very clear about, they didn't spread very quickly at first. Malaysia's an interesting case. There was a super spreader event at a large Muslim religious gathering, which has managed to infect huge numbers of people who'd come from neighbouring countries. And these super spreader events are starting to make it take off. But the governments in this part of the world have quite limited capacity. People can't tolerate extended lockdowns because of the lack of economic backup. So their options are limited. You know, countries like Myanmar, they've only got one place they can test at all. They've recorded very, very few cases. So, you know, what you see officially recorded here, everybody knows, is a much, much smaller proportion of what's really happening, where there are probably quite worrying trends at the moment.
Jonathan, thank you. Jonathan Head there. You're listening to the BBC World Service. Now Jerry has the headlines.
French police are stepping up checks to prevent people leaving Paris for Easter to stop the coronavirus spreading. Those breaking the rules will be fined. Donald Trump has rejected the idea of introducing tougher US-wide restrictions after New York urged everyone to wear a face covering in public. And the World Bank is giving India $1 billion of emergency funding to help fight the outbreak.
Yes, let's get more on that story. I asked our reporter in Delhi, Divya Arya, how important this emergency funding is for India.
India's own expenditure on health as a percentage of its GDP is really, really small. It's just over 1%, and the country has very few doctors and hospitals, 8 doctors per 10,000 people, and one state-run hospital for about 50,000 people. And remember, private healthcare is quite unaffordable for people here. Now, the Prime Minister Narendra Modi had promised nearly $2 billion to boost health infrastructure last week when he announced a complete lockdown of the country. But since then, we have heard various complaints from across the country by health workers of lack of personal protective equipment. And as of today, 50 healthcare workers have tested positive for COVID-19.
And the Prime Minister, he's been asking people in India to light candles, and he's been accused of carrying out a PR stunt after a few days ago asking people to bang pots and pans in order to show their support for the lockdown.
Indeed, the Prime Minister gave what many people are calling a pep talk, asking people to stand with the 1.3 billion others in the country this Sunday at 9 p.m. for 9 minutes, light candles and torches in their balconies. So even the share market after that announcement plunged, just showing that people really felt shortchanged from that address where they were actually hoping for specific measures to be announced.
There is a big concern in particular about religious gatherings, spreading it even more quickly than it's already being spread. What's the government doing to tackle those concerns?
Well, religious gatherings have been banned completely. There were a lot of violations in the beginning, and one particular case where Tablighi Jamaat, which is an Islamic missionary movement and has its global spiritual center called Markaz in Delhi, had a big gathering which had people from various countries outside India, including Southeast Asia. And it seems that is now emerging as a hotspot because of the interaction between thousands of people that happened there. Those people have now gone back to their villages, to their cities, to their states in different parts of the country. But the health ministry has said that 9,000 people are being put in quarantine because they either attended that gathering or came in touch with people who attended that gathering.
Divya Arya. One world leader who continues to deny the dangers of the coronavirus is the Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro. He's still trying to urge people to carry on as normal, but he's facing a growing backlash as states have ordered schools and businesses to close. However, with 40% of workers employed in the informal economy, many feel forgotten by the authorities, as Katie Watson reports from Sao Paulo.
Life hasn't stopped yet in Paraisópolis, one of Sao Paulo's biggest favelas. Residents are running errands, motorbikes are weaving through traffic on the busy streets. On one side of the road is a cake shop, on the other, a locksmith. Both very much open, despite businesses having been told to close down. When people here live hand to mouth, how do you tell them to shut up shop? Gilson Rodriguez is standing in a football pitch in the middle of the favela with a loudspeaker. He's training residents to become so-called street presidents, volunteers who'll ensure households understand hygiene measures and the need to stay indoors. Gilson tells me that one of his toughest tasks is debunking misinformation coming from President Jair Bolsonaro.
When the president says something stupid, that coronavirus is just a sniffle so that people can go outside, well, the next day, people are out on the streets. He'll be partly responsible for any deaths here because he's creating this situation.
The problem extends beyond favelas. In the west of Sao Paulo, Giovanna Reis Gonçalves is keeping herself busy in her kitchen, making tapioca for her grandson who's off school. She used to sell tapioca outside a metro station, but when businesses were told to close last month, she was forced to stop work. A couple of weeks ago, she took to Twitter to highlight the problems facing informal workers, and it had a big impact. Millions of people will struggle to keep going as the pandemic continues to spread. Gilles knows that, and she's not arguing against Health Ministry advice to stay indoors, but she thinks the government needs to step in and help quickly. Already it's promised informal workers $110 a month, but it's not enough, says Gilles, and it's so far not forthcoming either.
Hello friends, welcome back to Home Sweet Home.
I'm not sleeping.
Side 20
I won't be able
centimeter,
to
side
afford my
17
rent next month.
centimeter.
I don't know how I'm gonna do it. I want him to think about these things.
Então eu queria que ele pensasse nessas medidas. Nesse aí minha patroa não comentou nada.
Later in the day, I meet Gilles' neighbour, Isauri. We meet just a few blocks away from the modern apartment building where she cleans for a doctor. She's grateful to still be working. All her other jobs disappeared after the virus hit. Isauri has high blood pressure and pre-diabetes, all issues that make her more vulnerable to coronavirus. And despite recommendations that non-essential workers stay home, she feels she has little choice. She won't get paid if she stops coming, she says. It's a situation repeated across the country.
Eu tenho pouco de medo.
I'm a bit scared. On the bus, people cough. They don't take care covering their mouths. But I need to put food on the table. When I was a single mother, I had to eat food from rubbish bins on the street. I never want my kids to go through that again.
Eu não quero passar e nem quero que meus filhos passem novamente.
With businesses shutting down and government help slow to get off the ground, people's biggest fear in the coming weeks may not be COVID-19. It will be not being able to eat.
That report by Katie Watson in Sao Paulo. Throughout this pandemic, we've heard from doctors and nurses across the world about their frustration at the lack of testing and shortages of protective equipment that they need to fight COVID-19. But despite these concerns, a nurse in New York City has ended her maternity leave early to help her colleagues on the front line. Let's hear a clip from her audio diary.
There's so much tension, so much anxiety in the air. The thing that kind of is covering like a heavy blanket over everyone, over the entire hospital, is this: we're being overwhelmed. Hearing stories from nurses who floated here, immunocompromised, you know, and talking about the deaths, the deceased, the sadness, the stress. I just had a baby. She's almost 100 days old, and I was planning to spend a good, 4 or 5 months with her breastfeeding. And as this pandemic hit, I've been at home, anxious, nightmares, waking up thinking about my coworkers, thinking about how this is happening, and I can't stay home anymore. I'm heading into the hospital now from home in the car finding out about our coworkers getting sick, gravely sick. We've heard that there are 2 nurses in New York City who are colleagues who work in the hospitals that we work in the same conditions, with the same shortage of PPE, staffing, and testing, who are dying. We're afraid for our patients. We're so sad to see folks dying in our ICUs with no family around because of the no visitor policy. And I think at this point, many of us are enraged.
Woke up from your nap already?
I wouldn't have cut my maternity short if there wasn't a pandemic, if there wasn't a severe shortage of nurses, if I didn't hear my coworkers telling me how they're crying every day. You know, there's a lot of fear of talking because we have our licenses and we have our jobs, but this is such a serious issue that's why nurses are coming out to speak. There's hope if we see that our strength is in ourselves and our collective power, and if we unite.
That's an audio diary from a nurse in New York City who's ended her maternity leave early to support her hospital in the fight against the coronavirus. Now, Jerry has some other news from our news desk.
Pubs and bars in Hong Kong have been shut down as the authorities tighten the restrictions on movement in response to the coronavirus. The closure is scheduled to last 2 weeks. Anyone who violates the new order faces up to 6 months in jail and a fine of more than $6,000. The Hong Kong government says more than 60 of the territory's 800 coronavirus cases have been linked to bars. Meanwhile, here in the UK, the Nightingale Hospital in London, built specially to deal with the coronavirus, will officially open shortly. It will eventually be able to take up to 4,000 COVID-19 patients. 2 more field hospitals are planned, and extra health facilities are being put in place in several cities. One other story, dozens of boat passengers and crew are reported to be missing after a ferry attempted a voyage in the Solomon Islands, despite warnings not to embark during the passing of Cyclone Harold. The boat was thought to be carrying passengers from the Solomon capital Honiara to West Malaita province on Thursday night, when it encountered rough seas. And that's the news.
Jerry, thank you. Now, most of this programme has been focusing, as you would expect, on the coronavirus pandemic, but let's turn now to something very different. The work was the most secret in the Second World War, carried out by code breakers at the UK's Bletchley Park and Wadden Hall. Now, unique footage of that closed world has been made public. Bletchley Park is hoping people can identify relatives seen in the film. Our security correspondent Gordon Carrera reports.
Hidden away for 3/4 of a century, this is a film that should never have been made. German codes like Enigma were broken at Bletchley Park, but it was Wadden Hall which then sent the material out to Allied military commanders in the field. The film, donated anonymously to Bletchley, is no official record though. Rather, it's a home movie, offering a unique snapshot into the off-duty life of staff. The men and women are seen pulling faces at the camera, relaxing, playing football and cricket, relieving the tension of wartime work when they were not even allowed to tell their own family what they were doing.
Well, the newly discovered video was verified with the help of 93-year-old Jeffrey Pigeon, who worked for MI6 at Bletchley Park. He described the footage.
It's extraordinary. It's black and white, and it shows, 25 men, most of them smiling. It was obviously very light-hearted, and it was taken in, we guess, July, August 1940. I can for sure identify 6 or 7, and another 4 or 5 I can guess, but I wouldn't want to put my name to that. But most important of all, this was shown to me on Veterans Day last year, and as the film rolled by, it's a black and white, rather spotty film, and as it rolled by, I'm afraid I shouted out, "That's my dad." That I was absolutely astonished. I mean, it really was a great moment for me. And I was there, my father was there, my mother was a nurse at the clinic, and my younger brother Trevor went on with MI6 for 33 years. When you look at it, you can't believe that these chaps had just outfitted 60 Packards with wireless sets. And, these chaps, they're all got their hands dirty. These are the very beginning chaps. This is the element of the whole outfit, starting with Pop, Gambier Parry. But he called himself Pop. He's a lovely man. He called my father Pidge, and on the 2 or 3 occasions he spoke to me, he called me Young Pidge.
The memories of Geoffrey Pigeon, the young Pidge there. Thanks very much for listening to The Newsroom.
This is the BBC World Service.
Life changes.
I'm Rob Wilson, and I'm telling the story of reconciliation at the Ethiopia-Eritrea border.
Our wedding was very great, and now I hope our son's baptism will be even better. I hope lots of family from Eritrea and Ethiopia will come.
She has a new baby boy, born in the northern Tigray region of Ethiopia, where family ties spanning the border with Eritrea have been rekindled since a peace deal in 2018.
We had missed each other so much. There were tears of happiness when we saw each other.
For 20 years, the border was locked down and the communities on either side separated. And while the official checkpoints remain closed, the demilitarization of the border region is allowing movement between the two countries in ways unimaginable just 2 years ago.
Ethiopia and Eritrea, rebirth at the border. Saturday at 18 and Sunday at 11 GMT.
Hello, I'm Manny Jasmy, and on this week's World Football, Pat Nevin will explain why some clubs are reluctant to make their players take pay cuts. The Watford defender Christian Cavaselli will join us to talk about how he's been calling up fans to keep their spirits up, even if some of them don't believe that he is who he says he is. And we find out why football in Nicaragua is continuing despite the coronavirus outbreak. So join Heather O'Reilly, Pat and me after the BBC News.
BBC News with Jerry Smith. French police have stepped up spot checks around Paris to prevent an Easter holiday exodus spreading coronavirus. The capital has been badly hit by the disease. Those who break the lockdown face a fine of €135 for a first offence, rising to €3,750 or a 6-month jail sentence for repeat offenders. A day after the US recorded nearly 1,000 deaths from the coronavirus, a debate is growing in the country about whether to introduce tougher restrictions. The authorities in New York have urged everyone to wear a face covering when they're outdoors. But President Trump says he's not issuing a mandatory nationwide order. Australia's chief medical officer has said that the actual number of the coronavirus cases worldwide could be 5 to 10 times higher than the 1 million known cases. Dr. Brendan Murphy said the underreporting was due to inconsistent testing in some countries. The World Bank has approved emergency funding of $1 billion to help India tackle the outbreak there. The money will be used to buy testing kits, ventilators and protective equipment, as well as set up new isolation wards. The funds are part of a wider World Bank package to help 25 countries. In other news, dozens of boat passengers and crew are reported to be missing after a ferry attempted a voyage in the Solomon Islands despite warnings not to embark during the passing of Cyclone Harold. A rescue operation was launched by the authorities in the South Pacific state on Friday morning. Shares in a large Chinese coffee chain have slumped after an investigation revealed the company lied about its sales, exaggerating revenue by more than $300 million. Luckin Coffee said its chief operating officer had fabricated sales last year by about 40%. BBC News.
Well, the studio's ready, so if you're both ready, let's kick off.
Leading the conversation on the global game. This is World Football on the BBC World Service.
And this is Manny Jasmy. Welcome to the programme. I hope you're well. I hope your friends and family are well. And if you're in lockdown, I hope you're dealing with the absence of social contact. With me, as always, the former USA international Heather O'Reilly and the former Scotland international Pat Nevin. And Heather, since we last spoke, sadly, the death toll in the United States from coronavirus has soared. But I'm just wondering what that means for you as someone who is pregnant. Are you able to still go to your routine hospital appointments and see the doctor and that kind of thing?
Well, it's funny that you ask that because watching the news in New York City, where it is, the epicenter of the corona crisis here in the U.S., the New York City hospitals started to not allow even partners go to childbirth. So for a few days, women were giving birth without their partners there, and I got really upset about it because I thought that this was the future of what would be happening even where I am in North Carolina. And I was laughing with my husband. I was like, "What, are you just going to drop me off like it's the airport and head on your way, and I'm going to just have a baby on my own?" But no, it's scary times for I think everyone. I mean, yes, I'm pregnant right now, so that's not ideal, but I also feel fortunate that I'm healthy and able to work from home and have a comfortable environment, and so I guess it's one of those things that I actually am grateful for my situation as is.
Now, Pat, people are getting really bored at home. Some of them seriously bored and, in my opinion, extremely desperate. I sent a tweet to our WhatsApp group from a guy who was spending his time looking you up, looking at images of you in the 1980s.
Yes.
What did you think of those images? Were you
That is desperate.
It's desperate. Obviously, there's a lot of people sending in a lot of things that are trying to make you laugh, and I think that's what that was all about. Him trying to make himself laugh and me laugh, and no doubt anyone else who was linked into him. But you're right about it. You do get bored. You do those strange and daft things. And at the moment, as you probably know, I've been writing a book, and I finished it ages ago. But what happens now? We've got time. I go back and touch it up, and then change a bit, and then move a little bit. And it's a bit like a band that makes an album. After a year tinkering, you don't know what it means anymore.
You can't remember what it's about.
Yeah, used to think when I finished it, oh, that's really good, I really like that, and then a year later you think, is that any good? So I'm going to leave it. I'm absolutely going to leave it.
Well, I'm looking forward to the World Football Years chapter, and my lawyers are on standby.
Part 2, mate. Part 2.
For whenever that comes out. Well, I want to begin, guys, this week by asking how differently the football landscape might look whenever games return. Here are a few snapshots of how the coronavirus absence is already affecting the game. In Spain, Lionel Messi announced that the Barcelona players will take a 70% pay cut so that the club's non-playing staff can still be paid in full. The Uruguay coach Oscar Tabarez and 400 of his colleagues have all been laid off by the Uruguay Federation. And the 7 times champions of Slovakia, Žilina, have declared bankruptcy. And all of this is for the simple reason that while there are no games, no money is coming in. In England, Tottenham caused controversy by announcing that their non-playing staff will take a 20% pay cut while they continue to pay their players an average of $94,000 a week. Pat, you've been the chief executive in a players' union here in England, but also chief executive of a club in Scotland. So give us the views from both sides of the negotiating table.
You're right, it's such a wide and varied discussion. Let's keep the discussion to the very top players then, because the ones below that is completely different for them, because they're not earning enough to keep themselves going for the rest of their lives. But the very top players, in the top of the top leagues, this is completely different. Now, we know that Bayern, Barcelona, everyone from there to Birmingham and Bournemouth, some people are taking cuts already and doing what is seen to be the right thing. And certainly, I think the players should probably in time be offering their happy meetings between the FA and the Premier League and the PFA. You know, and we know that things can be sorted out via that way. That would be the most sensible way, of course, to do it, because, you know, if one player does one thing and another does another, you start getting compared and who's not doing the right thing. So it's much more sensible to do it as an agreement with the entire group. That's number one from that. The other side of it is you look at the owners and the clubs themselves. Now, a number of people say to me, sure, the clubs are asking, their other staff to take pay cuts, but they aren't asking their players. Well, I have to tell you the honest truth about that. If they tell some player to take a pay cut, those players understand that's breach of contract. Some of the players may walk. Now, if they walk, the clubs then lose the value of those players. It could be 50, 60, 70 million pounds. That's the law. That's the way the law is, and it only takes one player to be morally reprehensible and do that for it to be impossible. So that's why they're not doing it, and everyone has to understand that. It has to be an agreement that comes from the clubs and the players together.
how worried are you, Heather, that some clubs, as the more economic problems bite, might see the women's team, the women's branch of the club, as an easy sacrifice, financial sacrifice, and offload them basically?
Yeah, it's a huge fear on the women's side. I mean, a lot of people think that it's the first program to go kind of thing if a club is in a dire situation. I think a lot of clubs were losing money on their women's side already, so it's easy to now rationalize, well, we tried, and due to coronavirus and the implications there, that we just can't do it anymore. So that is a huge fear. But I mean, I think that come a year, and maybe I'm delusional or naive, but I think that things will go back to normal. I really do. I actually think that this will be a massive blip on the football radar, don't get me wrong, but that things will continue on. That's the hope, I guess, in a lot of ways that it does, but yeah, it's hard to imagine that right now, isn't it?
Well, despite being in lockdown here in England, the Watford and Belgium defender Christian Cavaselli has been doing his best to raise spirits by calling up fans and giving them goodwill messages. And I'm glad to say that he's called us and he's raising our spirits. Now, Christian, great to speak to you. How are you doing, first of all, and your family?
I'm good, very good. Lockdown like everyone, I think. We are waiting.
What have you been saying to fans, and how surprised have they been when you called them up? How's it work? Do you just get a number and call them and say, hi, it's Christian Cavaselli here?
Yes, I get a list of 12 names from the club, and I spent almost an hour to call everyone, and some of them were surprised. I think that some of them didn't even believe that it was that it was me, because they just finished the call so fast. And
really?
Yes, and there was as well a couple of person. I spent like 10-15 minutes with both of them, because they were really happy to speak with me, and I enjoy it.
And what do they want to talk to you about? Is it the state of the team, the football side, or are they talking about life as it is at the moment for them?
Yeah, most of the time was about life, and football was a little part of our conversation. They wanted to know how I'm keeping fit, how is my family. It was really nice and really good exchange.
Has it helped you as well as helping them to talk to other people? I mean, I don't know if you live on your own or if you have your family, but talking to other people in a similar situation to yourself, as in lockdown and not able to do anything, has it helped you?
Yes, it helps me, because I spoke with two persons. One of them I spoke only with the wife of the fans, of the ticket holder, because her husband was really sick, couldn't even speak to the phone. So
really,
when you heard things like this, you can keep your feet on the ground and think about how lucky you are to be healthy and to be far from this virus. Yes.
Christian, have there been any funny moments in these phone calls, and are there any people you have phoned where you would maybe keep in touch with?
The most funny moment was when I called someone and I said, hi, I'm Christian Cavaselli from Watford, and he was just keeping saying, oh yes, okay, but we don't need anything.
Sales goal.
Yeah, I think the phone call lasts 30 seconds, something like this. Yeah. Thank you, but we don't need anything. So yeah, that was very funny.
Christian, a lot of players who retire say the thing they miss most of all is the camaraderie in the dressing room. And as a footballer, you're